Hi everybody, Steve Griffiths here, developer of the MTPredictor software program. In today's MTPredictor video, I'd like to follow up on some of the analysis we were doing in our customers training webinar on Friday, particularly on the larger degree support levels for the USE minis. So I want to just go over this and just show you what we were talking about in the webinar and just show you how that unfolded. As you can see, the ES actually declined. It made a low here around half 2 and then had a strong rally up into just before close. So I want to show you what we were talking about on Friday. Now remember, our webinars are from 10:30 to 11:30. So if I put, perhaps if I put a vertical line on here at about 11:30, which is here. So that's when our webinar ended, okay? So I want to show that what the analysis we were doing before our webinar ended at 11:30. What we were talking about this was the last swing. You can see on the 15-minute chart. What I've done is gone up to the higher time frame chart. So this is the last swing into this high. So we went back to this previous pivot here, right mouse click, place the DP level on. Now that was actually on the chart in advance. It was on the chart during our webinar, which was basically there. You can see where our webinar ended. So the market hadn't got there. Can you see that? By the time our webinar ended here, the market was up around the 1920 level and it hadn't reached this level. So what we were saying was that the market trend was down until this level was reached. And as you can see, it was reached a bit later in the day, around half 2, and that nailed the very low of the day for you. If we look at the YM, there were actually a level a little bit earlier. There was a level here off this pivot. In fact, I'll take this off. So we had a pivot here and we're having potential support zones around there. But what we were saying is, because the YM is only 30 stocks and the ES is 500, even though the YM was reaching its support zone earlier in the day, it may well roll over and carry on down until the ES found its level. So let's see what that looks like for potential trade setups. Well, if we go to the YM, you can see that we did have a potential TS1 buy setup here. And we were looking at this and we were saying that even though this was a potentially valid trade setup, in fact, actually, if you look at just the YM in isolation, this would have been a potential holy grail trade setup, because this would be large degree support, initial rally, initial decline, unfolding as ABC. Therefore, you're expecting a strong rally. But what we do is we like to see all the markets in unison. In other words, they're telling you the same story. So because we had the YM, which is obviously the index of only 30 stocks, giving us potential support and then a potential buy setup, we were saying that yes, that was a valid setup, but the market may well roll over and carry on down. And as you can see, that's exactly what it did. And we said that it was likely to carry on down into the this 15-minute support zone on the ES. So let's see on the 3-minute chart what that meant for the ES. Well, there it is. That's where our webinar finished at 11:30. The market did indeed roll over, came down and came down and came down, but just look where it made the low of the day, right at our higher time frame support zone. Remember, this we were talking about this literally hours and hours and hours beforehand during our webinar, which was here. So this was on the chart in advance. This is the power of these DPs. They are leading indicators. So of course here we had a lovely trade setup that came in right at our support zone. So we had a shorter time frame 3-minute buy setup. They see our DP buy coming in at higher time frame support. Therefore that would be a good trade to take. If you'd gone to the first target, that would have been a nice 3-hour profit. But what a great place to look to buy off the very bar of the low of the day. But if we zoom in, can you also see how the previous bar, this one, was actually a VSA bar, a volume spike analysis we called it. In other words, there was unusually high volume coming in on this last move down through this prior pivot. Because the move didn't carry on and the next bar it snapped back up, we could assume that it was actually professionals. In other words, it was professionals coming in and buying from the amateurs on this move down. So this is also what we call a VSA trade setup as well. In other words, the professionals were coming in and buying and therefore likely to move the market a bit further, and that's exactly what happened. So rather than coming out at the first target, you could then want to hold it a little bit longer. If you'd held it into close, it would have been a nice 4-hour profit. If you trailed with the 80-hour stop, which is our red and blue dots, you'd have come out with approximately 9R profit. Or if you'd come back to this prior minor pivot high here, remember I don't normally suggest using DPs off minor pivots, but in this circumstance where you are only in the last half an hour of trading, it's the last half an hour of trading before a holiday, which is the September Labor Day holiday, the next day, which was Monday, and here you were sitting on potentially 6.5R profit. That might be a good one to either take at that level or at the very least trail one tick below the bar lows. So you can see here would have actually netted a nice 5.9R profit. So a very, very nice trade there indeed. So I just wanted to follow up on this just to show how we had this 15-minute support zone on our chart during our webinar yesterday, which was here 10:30 to 11:30. So literally hours and hours beforehand, we were saying that this was the likely area for supporting the ES, and also that the YM, even though it reached its support level earlier, was likely to roll over and carry on down because the ES hasn't reached its support zone. Remember, we like to see all the markets telling us the same story. So if they're all in support at the same time, it gives a stronger signal. It doesn't negate taking trade setups on one of the markets. So in this particular example, if you had taken this, it would have been a -1R loss. Losses can and do unfold, but because we use correct position sizing to vary the number of lots, contracts or shares to keep our initial risk constant for each trade, in this example less than 2% of a sample $20,000 US dollar account, this would have been only a -1R loss. Compare that with a profit of potentially almost 6R here, and you can see how the profits are much larger than losses, and that's what professional traders do. They keep their losses small and under control and look to have profits that are much larger. So I thought this was a good video to follow up on, particularly as the last video I did was when we looked at a very hard day. If you go and have a look at the previous video, you can see we had a very hard day yesterday with, or the previous day, with some losing trades, and it's amazing what the cyclical nature of trading does. That's where the markets go in cycles, where your profits, losses, and sort of good days and hard days, if you want to phrase it like that, go in cycles. So after a very hard day like that, the MTPredictor analysis kicked in, and there we go, nailing the low of the day absolutely perfectly with that 15-minute support, then gave you a DP buy absolutely perfectly with a VSA set up. That's an absolutely beautiful trade when all these things come together like that, and that then got you in with a very nice rally for a large profit. So a good example of how MTPredictor could project the support zones in advance, and how we took advantage of that with an automatic trade setup, getting you long off the very bar of the low of the day there. So a very nice trade to take.